Welcome to MyLife, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A gute Woche, good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer book called Tanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC, and it's in memory and in honor of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg and Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz, Olav Shalom, as well as in the merit of Zev Yecheskel and Risha Katz. May they have many healthy, long years. If you want to listen to recordings of previous episodes of this program, please go to chassidusapplied.com. So after learning the purpose of the Sefer Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says on the cover page that this Sefer, this book, is coming to explain well the verse in the Torah that godliness and Judaism and Torah and mitzvahs are korevei lecha dover me'ed, are very relevant to you, to each individual. And we also learned in the compiler's foreword that this Sefer is written with the love and the connection of the intimate bond between the Alter Rebbe, Yedei Makire Ka'amina, that recognition, the awareness that only comes from closeness. So we have in it not just ideas that are based in our Torah, but they're also presented in a way that's personal to each one of us. As the Alter Rebbe says explicitly, all the answers to all the questions that each of us has in our personal lives in serving God. So armed with this awareness of the purpose of Tanya, korevei lecha dover me'ed, its personal nature, teaching each one of us how we can deal with all our challenges and how we can live up to the calling and the mission of our lives, we will now begin the actual study of Tanya. Now, Tanya is made up of 53 chapters. So it's an extensive sefer, even though many see it as a short sefer, relatively speaking, but it's still, for most of us, quite extensive. So before we actually learn inside, I want to just give an overview of the actual Sefer Tanya. And always keeping in mind the focus of this shir, of this class, is the korevei lecha, the deep relevance. And I would even add the indispensability of helping us be the person we should be in this world. Now we all know we have many challenges. We have challenges, internal ones, external ones, distractions. Well, the Alter Rebbe came to address them all. What do we do when we're davening and we can't focus? What happens when we have challenges at home with friends and others, whether it can be jealousies or anger or pettiness? We all know that this life is not an easy one. All this is addressed in Tanya. Can we overcome our internal emotions, our fears, our insecurities, our depression, our negative feelings about ourselves, about others? The list goes on. So whatever question you have, whatever challenge you have, I strongly suggest, as we learn this, is fill in the blank. That is what each one of us has to do. What are the immediate issues you're struggling with right now? And we're going to be looking at the Tanya to find the answer. That's how you respond to a personal offer, to a gift that the Alter Rebbe is giving us, and saying, I will use Torah to apply it, korevei lecha hadover me'ed, and in a way of recognition that we know each other intimately well. So what we have to do is bring ourselves by being aware and recognizing our challenges, whatever they may be, and then looking in Tanya to derive the answer. But Tanya is not written like a self-help book with a bullet list of question, answer, question, answer. It's written in a Torah way. You say Dose Baharei Kedesh, as the Alter Rebbe says in his introduction, which means that it's based on and saturated with throughout Chazal, Medrashim, Zohar, Kabbalah, starting, of course, with Torah Shebiksav. But let that not distract us. Many times when people read and hear the language of Chazal, they say, okay, it's another shir, another idea, concept, abstract concept. No. Here it's the exact opposite. It's Torah coming alive in our personal lives. And that's what Tanya is all about. But in order to derive those answers, and in a way that every individual can find their personal guidance and spiritual advice, we need to apply ourselves in that way. So that's point number one, critical that you bring yourself to it. And in direct proportion to how much we invest, not just in the learning of it, but bringing our issues to the table, in direct proportion to that, you will find your answers. There was once someone sitting at the table with the Tzemach Tzedek, the grandson of the Alter Rebbe, the third Chabad Rebbe. And he was, I guess he was somewhat of a skeptic. And he was saying, what did Tanya already accomplish? What did it come to contribute? The Tzemach Tzedek heard him saying it and said to him, did you ever learn Tanya? So he said, no. So he said, to the Tzemach Tzedek responded, Indira tistaka garnish duvgitan. And you, Taka, didn't accomplish anything because you didn't learn it. What do we learn from this? Meklal lava teshemei hein, that the more we bring ourselves and learn it and ask the right questions and not be ashamed of asking those questions, the better we will derive the answers that were provided for us personally, individually, and answers to your specific questions in an intimate fashion. Point number two, which will also explain the general thrust and direction, you can say the plot of Tanya. What is the plot? And that is, there's no way that a person could discover what their mission in life is in serving God in the best way without understanding how we tick. What makes you tick? What are the forces? What are the voices within you? The conflicting voices. The option to go do something that is beautiful, kind, noble, to serve God, to help another. Or the temptation that we often have is to take care of me. Selfishness. We need to dissect and understand what are these two forces inside us. And what do we do to resolve this conflict? One that we all deal with and struggle with every moment of our lives. What about, as I mentioned, times when you feel down, you don't feel motivated. You feel very materialistic, you feel very focused on making a living or making money. Or in general, your intention is focused on immediate gain, not necessarily on your spiritual inner life. And these are questions and challenges all of us deal with, everyone in their own way. So that's what the Tanya comes and addresses every one of these possible scenarios. And how does the Alter Rebbe do so? The first thing he begins with is establishing, since Korev Elecha Dover Ma'ed, you want to find how Judaism, how Torah is relevant, is critical to your life. That without it, God forbid, you can't really be who you're supposed to be. And with it, will transform every aspect of your life. You need to know what's primary in your life. So the first themes he's going to be addressing is that we have a neshama. You have to know you have a soul. Now you could say, what's the big chiddush? I have a soul? Yes, because we are bodies, and we think like bodies think. We're physically oriented in our lives. You wake up in the morning, you feel your pain, you feel your fatigue, you feel your hunger. You feel yourself. So soul-oriented thinking is one of the first steps necessary. And that's what the Alter Rebbe will introduce quite quickly at the end of the first chapter and going into the second chapter. The next thing is, what is the soul made of? What are its faculties like? How does it express itself? Then the Alter Rebbe will continue and explain the two extremes in our lives. What is right and what is wrong? What is good and what is evil? What is Kedusha, holiness? And what is its antithesis? The concealment of holiness. And then the Alter Rebbe will come back to the original themes that he began of who are you? What defines you in the context of this battle between the animal soul and the divine soul? And how do we even measure that? So the outset of Tanya will begin with categorizing, based on Chazal, the Gemara, that there are different categories. Tzaddik, Beinoni, Rasha, words we hear all the time. But the Alter Rebbe will give a whole new take on it. A take that we can then apply. Because most of us will say, I'm not a tzaddik, but maybe a Beinoni. Or some people dismiss themselves and saying they're wicked, they're Rasha. But those are simplistic, childish terms. When you go deeper into it, we will find out how these are three ways of measuring the very litmus test of where you stand in your life. So all this, as you see, is not just knowing how you tick, but how do you measure? How do you come to a self-awareness that allows you to deal with any challenge? Because we all know, awareness of a problem is half the cure. Awareness means you have to know what the problem is and not just be going through the motions and following circumstances. And then you have to know where you stand. Then you can take control of your life. So the beginning chapter of Tanya will establish these categories. Later on in chapters 9, 10, 11, 12, and on, the Alter Rebbe will apply that to who we are. And then, by the end of chapter 16 and 17, the Alter Rebbe concludes the first section, so to speak, of mastering self-control, self-awareness and self-control in your life, understanding all the tools that are necessary to do so. Then the Alter Rebbe will reveal another dimension, that each of us has an innate connection to the divine, what he calls Ava Mesuteres, a concealed love, which now gives us a whole other dimension, that you have the resources. In addition to the resources we discussed earlier, the conscious resources, that you also have superconscious resources that help you connect. Without going into all the details, the Alter Rebbe will then deal with the issues of feelings of negativity and depression. And, of course, the antithesis to that is joy and optimism. The necessity for appreciating the positive in your life, loving another, Avos Yisrael. Alter Rebbe will then continue to, from microcosm to macrocosm, not just the individual's role in this world, but what is our focus and our mission in the larger world, not just our individual service to God, but also our ability and tools necessary to transform the world around us. That will be chapters 35, 36, 37. And then the Alter Rebbe will go that in addition to everything we spoke about action-oriented Judaism that helps us change ourselves and the world around us, the role of kavana, intention, of love, of awe, and goes deeper once you've covered the earlier stages of discipline and growth and spiritual awareness. You come to a deeper dimension of bringing yourself into the picture. We will, of course, discuss all this in much more detail. Just wanted to lay out the map of the 53 chapters in brief. Before we begin actual learning inside, I want to add one more thing. There are three names that usually Tanya is referred to. One is called Sefer Tanya, Tanya Kadisha. You hear the word Tanya. That's based on the first word of the whole Sefer, Perek Aleph, Tanya. We learned Tanya. The rabbis taught. Another name is Sefer Shel Beinanim. That's the name the Alter Rebbe gave it. A book of, some call it intermediate, some call it in-betweeners. Beinani. Beinani literally means between Tzaddik and Rasha, the middle individual. And that's because the Tanya is so much based on that fact that Beinani is something each of us can access. As I'll explain later in chapters 12 and then chapters 14. Midas kol adam v'achareh kol adam yimshech. This is what is accessible and expected, the standard that a normal and average human being can reach. And the third name is Likutei Amorim, an anthology or a collection of sayings referring to the teachings that he had heard mipisofrim from books and from scribes, which are the basis of the teachings that, of course, include the entire Torah. Likutei Eitzes, the Alter Rebbe said, an anthology of advice. The word Tanya became very popular, maybe the most popular name of it. It says that Tzemach Tzedek, that the word Tanya is the same letters as Eson. That says in Chazal. Eson means strength, power, chizuk. Because the Alter Rebbe is revealing the infinite power that you contain. Because without that confidence that you have what it takes, obviously you can't overcome challenges. So it's critical to reveal what you're capable of. It's the ultimate coach, if you can call it Kavyochel. What does a good coach do? Teaches you what you're capable of, what you have within you that you may not even be aware of. How much do we know about ourselves? Very little. We know the physical part of our lives, that which is obvious to the five senses. What are your inner resources like, your inner strengths? The Eson, Tanya Eson. And the second thing he says, Tanya is also a klippe. On the other extreme, Tanya also has a negative implication. It refers to a klippe, a husk, a concealment, a challenge that didn't allow our innermost selves to be revealed. So it has both sides to it, revealing the strength, but also countering anything that's blocking you from being able to recognize your strength. Because you can be very strong and very powerful, but you may not be aware of it. So with that, let us begin the actual study of Tanya. Bring yourself to it, bring your personal questions, challenges, issues, and let the Alter Rebbe speak to you personally in responding. I'm serving as just a facilitator to help translate and present the ideas. So we begin the beginning of Tanya. If you're following along with the text, it's right in the first Perek, the first chapter. Perek Aleph Tanya, B'Seif Perek Gimel de Nida. The rabbis taught at the end of chapter 3 of the tractate in the Gemara called Nida. The exact page is 30b, Lamed Omid Beis, Daf Lamed Omid Beis. The Gemara is made up of many tracts. Nida is the last tract with Gemara. So Alter Rebbe is citing a statement which immediately focuses and shows you how it's all saturated, all based on Torah. That's the beauty of it. He's not just coming and giving the advice component. He's showing how we derive it from the sources themselves, going all the way back, obviously, to Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh. So the word Tanya, the rabbis taught. What did they teach in Sof Perek Gimel of Nida? Mashbiya Neisei Tihi Tzadik V'al Tihi Rasha. That before a child is born, that's the context, before a child is born, his or her soul is made to swear an oath. Mashbiyan, mashvua, an oath. In other words, before each of us came to this earth, we were made to take an oath. And what is the oath? Tehi tzadik v'al tihi rasha. Be a righteous person, a tzaddik, and do not be a wicked person. In other words, in life, you're going to be presented with choices. Before you begin your life, the neshama is made to take an oath that you will be a righteous person and not a wicked person. Va'afilu kol ha'elim kulei eimrim lecha. Tzaddik ata. A second statement. Even if the entire world tells you that you are tells you you are righteous, you're a tzaddik, hoya be'necha kerasha. You should consider yourself like a wicked person. In other words, a message of humility. First message is be righteous and don't be wicked. And secondly, even if people tell you you're a tzaddik, in your own eyes, see yourself as a rasha. The Tzemach Tzedek interprets the word mashbiin, which means to take an oath, also from the word mazbiin, from v'achalta v'savota, to sate. that in addition to the meaning that every soul takes an oath, it's also empowered and sated with all the energy it will need to fulfill this oath. Which of course answers the big question, how could everyone take such an oath and then not necessarily fulfill? Because we're given the strengths and all the powers necessary to be a tzaddik and not to be a rasha, to be righteous and not to be wicked. Now the Alter Rebbe continues. In classic rabbinic style, he poses a question now. We just said in the second part of the statement that even if the entire world tells you you are righteous, you should consider yourself like a wicked person. The Alter Rebbe asks a question. We need to understand. The Tanan Ovis Perek Beis va'altihi rasha b'fnei atzmacha. Because didn't we learn the Mishnah that says in Ovis, Pirkei Ovis, the ethics of the fathers, chapter 2, Mishnah 13, the exact opposite. Don't consider yourself to be a wicked person. And here we said that even the world tells you, the whole world tells you that you're a tzaddik, you should see yourself as a rasha. Then the Alter Rebbe continues. This isn't just a question of a contradiction between two Maimorei Chazal. There's also a fundamental philosophical question here. V'gam, the Alter Rebbe continues, Im yeh beinecha kerasha, yera levove, v'yi otze v'lo yuchel aved Hashem b'simcha v'tov levov. If a person is going to see himself and consider himself like a wicked person, as the Gemara says in Tanya, in Nida, you will become downhearted and depressed, and you won't be able to worship God joyfully and positively, which is so fundamental in serving God. So it's a fundamental contradiction. The Alter Rebbe qualifies. And in case you think, you know what, maybe you'll consider yourself to be a rasha, but it won't affect you. So you won't be downhearted, you won't feel depressed. He continues, V'im lo yeira levove klal mizeh. But if you don't become sad at all from this fact that you're wicked, you could come to be lenient and flippant about your responsibilities, God forbid. So either way, the statement to say someone's look at yourself like a rasha, either will cause you to be depressed, and if not, it will cause you to be lenient. So how could the Gemara say that? Now, Alter Rebbe is not going to answer these questions till later. Chapter 13, the first question, and chapter 31 and 34, the second question. But that shouldn't disturb us. Why? Because this is the classic approach of how Tanya works. He's going to give us a higher perspective on life and how to look at ourselves. He's setting the stage with these questions, so they will be answered. But now, going to begin with an introduction of explaining different personality types. Now, to begin explaining this, Alter Rebbe is now going to introduce another Gemara, which is going to categorize 5 different types of people. We say 5 types of archetypes, you can say. And this is all coming to set the stage, as I said, about who you are, your personality type. So the Alter Rebbe continues. Acha inyan, that's an expression of Chassidus, Acha inyan, instead of saying, and here's the answer, Acha inyan, let's discuss the subject matter in broader context. And b'meilen, automatically we will find our answers. So it's a common expression of Chassidus, Acha inyan. Ki hine metzinu b'gemara hei chalukes. We find in the Talmud, in Gemara, we find 5 categories. Tzaddik v'tevlei, the tzaddik who has it good. That's the literal interpretation. Like a tzaddik who has a life that's a good life. That's how everyone basically explains it. Alter Rebbe is going to overturn this whole interpretation, as we shall see. So he has it good. Tzaddik v'ralei, the tzaddik who has it bad in this world. In other words, he has a life that's not an easy life. Rasha v'tevlei, the wicked person who has it good in this world, and v'rasha v'ralei, and the Rasha, the wicked person who has it bad, whose life is not easy. So far 4. This is the Gemara in Brachos, Zayin Aleph, 7a. Ubeinani. Beinani literally means in between. The middle person. Not a tzaddik, not a righteous, and not a wicked person. He's neither tzaddik nor a rasha, but has elements of both. So that's the 5th category. That's actually not in the Gemara Zayin Aleph. It's in the Gemara Brachos, Samach Aleph Beis, 61b. Now, the Gemara is talking about the issue, of course. Why is it the big question we all have? Why righteous people suffer and wicked people prosper? After the Gemara talks about different options how to answer the big question that I just mentioned, the Gemara explains that the difference between a tzaddik who has it well in this world and one that doesn't is a reflection of their inner personality. Tzaddik v'tevlei, tzaddik gomer. The tzaddik who has it good in this world has that blessed life because he's totally righteous. Tzaddik gomer, he's a complete tzaddik. Tzaddik v'ralei is tzaddik she'eino gomer. The tzaddik who has it bad in this world suffers misfortune because he or she is not totally righteous. So based on that, it seems that's the definition of the Gemara. That is dependent on the person's behavior. If he's complete, so he's fortunate and has it good. If he's not complete tzaddik, he has it bad. But the Alter Rebbe is not going to accept that entirely. That simple interpretation as I just said it. But for that, we'll have to wait till the next shir. We have the definition of time limits. So we'll stop here. We've opened up Tanya, and the relevant message each of us can take from this alone, even without going further, is to look at yourself and realize that whatever is going on in your life, you have tremendous potential, an inner strength. And we are embarking on a journey now that's going to help you access that strength and also minimize some of the weaknesses or the challenges that you have, perceived or real. So it's a good way to set our minds and think about it in that fashion. Look forward to see you in the next program. Recordings of all these classes can be found at chassidussupply.com. And now you can also present any question you may have at the same place. There's a forum. You can ask any question on this topics or any topics. Be well.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit chassidussupply.com for archived classes and more resources.